all about. Gather round the good stuff indeed. It's just this way at the Dim Carnival.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dim Carnival. This is Ryan.
And this is Rob.
And that's it. It's just us two. Bill is still raising his gargantuan child. His baby, I think they have some football teams already interested, if I haven't mentioned that already. Their child is less than a year old and large enough to ride most rides at Disneyland at this point. So yeah, just a real behemoth of a kid. And a literal handful. But Bill is expected to return. I don't know exactly when that's going to happen. Probably hopefully within the next month or two. We should hopefully get back on Hell's Pit. But until that time, I have been trying to think of ways that I could post stuff. And so what we ended up with, what I felt comfortable doing, was the episode that we had last episode. The episode that was taken over by Val, the robot, and bringing the Djinn, more information about the Djinn. And honestly, everything that happened, all the clips that I used in that episode were either directly reading from or inspired by or whatever, led to research from the email from one of our listeners, and that's Rob, and that's who's with us today. When I was making that episode, I went back and listened to when we first got, I think that was Rob, I think that was the first email that you sent us, actually, about the Djinn. I might be wrong about that.
Yeah, I think so, because I had been back listening, because I found you were already doing Jekyll Brothers, and I was back listening, and I was like, finally, I'm close enough that I can email them about something. Because I'm going to be on like Carnival of Cars. I'm like, no, they don't care about that no more. But I'm like, okay, they're still doing Jekyll Brothers. I can talk about Malenko a little bit.
It was really cool how they both fit in, and actually it was nice. It helped me when I was trying to plan out the arc of the episode, including the Malenko stuff and the Ecocide stuff together. Tied it really nicely together. So yeah, for everybody that, if you want to go back and check out, I think it's the second Jekyll Brothers episode, is when we got the email from Rob here, and it just completely blew me away. Like, I really went down the rabbit hole of trying to find more information about Islam and the representation of Jinn in Islam, and the story of Iblis and how it. I really wanted to know how it compared to the story of the devil from the Christian side or whatever. So anyways, all that stuff was super cool, and I needed to express to Rob how it was. I just really appreciated that, so he really just made it possible. And so I just had the thought I should bring him on, let him talk about it, because you know a lot about the band, and you have this other whole side of interest or whatever that I'm really in tune to. So just wanted to thank you, man, for that email. You really did make that last episode possible. And yeah, I'm just really curious, kind of. I cribbed a lot of your notes, but I'm curious, if you have any thoughts about that. But we'll get to that. But before we do, I want to give you the opportunity to just like kind of introduce yourself. If there's like to know kind of how you got introduced into ICP, and what your history is with the band.
All right. So how did I get interested into ICP? Oh God, that was so long ago. I was in high school and I was doing backyard wrestling. And my homie and we were going to meet these dudes that he knew, and so we're going to do backyard wrestling at their house. And we get there and we're kind of just digging through like costumes and whatever kind of extra clothes they had. to make characters, and my homie ended up being like this redneck looking guy, and I just grabbed like mismatching items and like this clown mask that he had, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna be like a serial killer homeless clown, and I'm fighting this guy who's a redneck, and the homie's homie was like, oh, you're just copying ICP, and I'm like, what's that? And he's like, oh, it's these white dudes that rap about the apocalypse. Well, clowns. And I was like, that's fucking stupid. What the fuck is that shit? And I was like, oh, well, I'm just like grabbing whatever. But anyway, we did our match and it was cool or whatever. But then the homie's homie gave me a mixtape, cassette tape, right? This is how long ago it was.
Wow.
And it had the Malenko sampler and then various songs from the Riddle Box. And so I don't remember if the first release of Malenko was out or if it was the second time it was released that was coming out. But yeah, so I was like, oh, cool, I'll check it out. And then like I left it in my tape deck for like 6 months. I was like, I don't even like I was like, that sounds so stupid. I don't even want to listen to it. And so I just kind of left it there on my radio and I didn't even listen to it. And then one day I was finally like, ah, fuck it, play it. And I was like, this shit's fucking bonkers. Like it blew my mind. I couldn't wrap my head around what was going on. And at the time I was listening to like Korn and, like Limp Bizkit and whatever else was out there at the time. Rage Against the Machine, 311, all that like rap rock stuff. And then like previously I'd been into like Nirvana and Pearl Jam. And so it was unlike anything I was listening to. I wasn't listening to much rap music, hardly any. My brother was all into like West Coast hip hop, but it just wasn't really for me. And then I got into the ICP shit and I was just like, oh fuck. Like this shit's crazy. And I just went like ham with it. And everybody in school knew me as like the ICP fan. And they'd all tease me. All my friends hated it. They were like, that shit's fucking stupid. But then I would do backyard wrestling, just around in a different circuits or whatever, with homies that were like all about the backyard wrestling. And I'd always meet juggalos through that. And that's how I built up like my first juggalo friendships was from doing backyard wrestling and like listening for who had the ICP music,
Wow. That is an awesome story, man. That is so great.
It's hilarious. I remember being like, oh man, that shit sounds stupid. Cause it did. Like like the way they described it, I was just like, that just sounds ridiculous. Like who would make up a band like that? Like it just sounded fucking stupid.
It's so wild to me because my first introduction to them, I thought that they were like legitimately trying to be scary. There was like, and I don't know, how old was I? Must have been like 14. Like I should have been old enough to know. And I knew that it was funny, obviously. But it just didn't, to me, I guess Riddlebox had, cause that was the first one that I listened to. I don't know. It felt like a little bit more serious to me. But obviously I understand, like, as I listen to the band that they are completely ridiculous. And so it's just interesting to hear, that perspective or whatever. But I'm curious. So, was around, at this point in your life, did you also have an interest in like religion and mythology? And as you got more into ICP and their kind of universe expanded, mythology expanded, was that something that you were like immediately interested in, or is it something that kind of developed later?
Yeah, so I don't really have an answer to that one. I don't think I was super interested in mythology at that point. I mean, I grew up reading like comic books and shit, and so everything kind of had like a mythological element to it. But I wasn't like reading about mythology. I wasn't really aware of the like history of mythology, right? And like I knew a little bit about like ancient Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology, but I didn't have any kind of like deeper interest in like expanding my knowledge on that. I would say, but at the same time I was fascinated by it. Like when I was in my 20s, I decided like I wanted to read every major canon for religious texts, right? And so I started with the Bible, and I just read the Bible, and then I read the Quran, and then I read the Bhagavad Gita, and then I kind of just kept spiraling. Like everything just fascinated me, that the stories were just so rich, you know, even they're, like they were ancient, but they were interesting and compelling stories. And so it kind of grew from that. When I went back to school when I was in my 30s, cause like I had been a high school dropout and I was working like shitty minimum wage jobs. And then I lost a job, doing customer service. And I was like, shit, what am I going to do with my life? You know, like I can't keep doing this. And so I decided to go back to school and I took a class on mythology. And, that's kind of where like thinking about ICP as like comparative mythology, text would do is, you know, kind of where that started. But I was reading Neil Gaiman's work in my 20s. And that's kind of like what drove me towards thinking about ICP in those terms. I don't know. It's kind of all in my head. Neil Gaiman's stuff is a huge influence of mine though. Like I don't know how many people like exist in the Venn diagram of like really excited about Neil Gaiman's literary works and really excited about ICP, but I'm right there in the center. I'm like, this shit's amazing. I wish they would work together, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, it fits right in because probably me and Bill at least are also in that same spot. I don't know how Steve feels about Neil Gaiman, but Bill and I are big fans. I love American Gods. Everything that I've read is, you know, substantially good.
Yeah,
I never read Sandman though.
Yeah, I remember hearing you guys say that, and you gotta fucking read Sandman.
Yeah.
Oh my god, it's amazing. If you love American Gods, or even if you just like it, maybe, but if you love American Gods, you gotta read Sandman because it'll blow your fucking mind.
Yeah, it'll happen at some point for sure. So yeah, man, like, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about, or if there's any criticism really is what I want to hear from you about how I kind of covered some of these topics that you're a little bit more knowledgeable about than I am. If you had any comments about the last episode, and you know anything more to say about the Jinn and how ICP incorporate some of those religious ideas or some of that mythology into their Dark Carnival universe or mythology.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have any criticisms. I thought the episode was fantastic. It was so fun to listen to. And I really liked the way you spliced the media together. I thought that was brilliant. Before you had done that episode, I was thinking about taking some of my thoughts and ideas and putting them as a podcast. And I would just record just me talking about it. And it was so boring to listen to just me rambling, you know? And I was like, and so when I heard that episode, I was like, oh, fuck, why didn't I think of that? Like, this is fucking amazing. Like, to listen to. So no criticism. I'm in awe. But I think it's interesting that you chose to do, the Jinn with Malenko. I think of all the Joker's cards as sort of transplants of the Jinn. My first essay that I had to write in my mythology class, was I had to compare a Greek mythology figure to any other mythological figure. And I asked my teacher, I was like, can I do like an ICP thing? And he's like, what's that? And so I kind of explained it to him and he's like, no. Dude, and he goes, you're gonna have to convince me. So I wrote him probably 10 or 15 emails, like breaking down the mythology of ICP, and finally he's like, all right, you're invested, go for it. And so I had to use Greek mythology, not Islam, but I focused on sort of the role that Malenko plays in the mythology, and he's what's called a chthonic. I think I'm saying that right. I don't know. It's a bunch of letters together. But he's a chthonic deity, which is a being of the underworld that is not like strictly the leader of the underworld. So not like the devil.
Right.
But like sort of death and of the underworld. So I'm trying to think of like the Grim Reaper, is like a chthonic, spirit, right? And so in Greek mythology, there's these beings that, so Neil Gaiman calls them the kindly ones, but that's not the right name. Oh, it's the Furies. So he uses the opposite. So like he makes them called the kindly ones, but they're the Furies, and they're spirits that live in the underworld. But what they do is they make people commit like blood deaths. So like they'll make family members kill family members, and then they torture them with guilt. And so Malenko, what he does is he tempts you with something, and then he tortures you with the guilt for having done the thing that he tempted you into.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was fascinating. So that was the first essay that I wrote, and I kind of wanted to build a whole like one for each Joker's card, right? And so I kind of thought about the Djinn, and I wrote a second essay which I published online. If you ever want to read it, you can just kind of like search my name, Robert Tidwell, and Carnival of Carnage, and it'll pop up on a website called Smashwords. It's only about 6 or 7 pages long, but it's comparing Carnival of Carnage to this the leader of the Djinn, which is where most of my notes about the Djinn and the Great Malenko came from, because like the way I was thinking about it was Malenko takes over a lot of the characteristics of the Djinn form, the second form of that. I think the name was Iblis, and then Carnival of Carnage takes a lot from the first form of that same figure. So that figure, after he falls from heaven or is kicked out of heaven, he kind of changes.
Right.
But Carnival of Carnage was sort of the beginning. I think the name was Azazel. I think, is that who it was? I don't remember. It's been a long time since I wrote the essay, and I'm really shitty with names. But the name. So one of the things that I found that was really interesting was the name of that spirit was also the name of this location, and so that's kind of what was really interesting to me, because Carnival of Carnage is both a spirit, right, the spirit of the carnival, but it's also a location. And then also the location in both the Hebrew Old Testament and in parts of the Quran is a place where sacrifices would happen. And what they would do is they would have 2 different goats. One would be the sacrificial goat, and one would be a goat that was set free. And so they would take all the town's sins, and they would place them in these sacrificial goats. And then one would be set out into the wilderness, and one would be slaughtered. And Carnival of Carnage kind of acts the same way, right? Like when you listen to it, it talks about this carnival coming into this town, and all the sins manifest the darkness of the dark carnival. And some people were led to believe, right, are sacrificed to the carnival. They die, and they're so evil they're just taken away. And then some people wake up the next morning, and it's just like a nightmare. And so I thought that was a really interesting parallel. And then something else that really like fascinated me was a linguistics parallel. It's sort of, I forget exactly how I did it. The essay has it more in depth, and I use a bunch of references to like point people to how I figured stuff out. So it's really fascinating. But there was a parallel between the word carnival and the word carnage, which both come from the root word that is that sacrifice of a goat is connected to linguistically. And that's why they both have the carn, right? So in Latin, the word carnival and the word carnage are very similar. And it's because they're both connected to that idea of like sacrifice and violence. And I thought that was really fascinating. And I think that's why the name works so well and why it catches on. Like it sounds linguistically like there's something in our brains that likes that pattern of the repetition, you know. And it's just it just all fell into this. And then knowing what I knew about Jumpsteady, I had heard him say once before about being really influenced by Malcolm X and choosing his name based on a character, not a character because it's a real person, but the historical figure that Malcolm writes about named Jumpsteady. Like it all fits so good, you know. And so I was really excited about it. And so I have a million thoughts about like the mythology, and I wanted to, I wanted to explore that as a writing exercise. But in college, all my essays and my, I was an art student, so I was always working on my own art, so I didn't have time to sit down and write essays about like shit that was interesting to me.
Right.
Oh God, I gotta do an essay about this painting I saw. I don't know what the fuck it was about. Like, maybe someday I'll get back to it, but I don't know. I tried it as a podcast and I recorded a couple episodes and they were just garbage, so I just deleted them.
Well, I'm glad we're getting to hear some of
'Cause-
this now. Because honestly, I had the idea to do this, to do the last episode when I was up late watching Ancient Aliens, trying to fall asleep, and they started talking about the Jinn. And I was like, holy shit, this is exactly what Rob emailed me about. And so I was like, I wonder what other media is out there that talks about the Jinn. And then that kind of started tumbling into this thing of where I could kind of cut all of these clips together and make this thing. But as I was doing my research, I was finding more information from some of those audio clips that made it into the episode. I listened to hours of like speeches or presentations or whatever to find those clips, and then but also the information that you initially shared in the email. It was really it was crazy to me that there was so much of that imagery, of those stories, those ideas that was incorporated into these songs so clearly. And it
Right.
made me wonder, is that just a coincidence because of the things that we know about a genie? Like, you only have to watch Aladdin, as a kid, and you can write a song about a genie, and it'll have these references just because of what a genie is. And so I'm curious, like, I know that at least I have the recollection that at the same time when Jumpsteady was down in the army and he was learning about Islam and reading the Quran, and or maybe no, it was when he was deployed or whatever, right? He was reading the Quran, and so it doesn't surprise me if there are some of these more developed religious mythology, like imagery or whatever stories that they're able to incorporate if they actually learn those things. But I'm curious what you think, if how much of it is coincidence, how much of it is intentional.
Yeah, so I don't think they sit down and go like, we got to change the gin into something that's our own, you know? But I think like any artist, right? They take stuff that they know and that they're passionate about and interested in, and then they funnel it through their world vision. And if you think about it, like you were saying, yeah, you can listen to Aladdin and you can turn around and make a song about a genie. But if you do that, it's gonna come out sounding like Disney, you know? Like,
Right. That's
like you
true.
can't.
That's true.
But I do think like our culture is so like seeped with these mythological references, and I think that they're curious people. Like I think it's interesting that one thing that I like to tell people, like people ask me like, why do you like ICP? Like you're so smart and they seem so dumb. And I'm like, and I'll be like, honestly, I mean, I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out of high school and I was kind of in the same boat they were in, like where I didn't feel like school was for me, you know, and I felt, sort of alienated by the system. And so I dropped out and I worked shitty jobs, but I think they probably are a lot smarter than people give them credit for. And sure, they might have a ninth grade education, but they're curious and they're interested in things. And I think they probably go and pick up books and read books about things that are exciting to them. And if you look at what other media they're interested in, I mean, they're crazy obsessed with like D&D and they're into those like Japanese martial arts movies, and they're, you know, those kinds of things are just saturated with mythology and mysticism and magic. And so I do think I think it's both. It's intentional and coincidental, because I think that's how our minds work, you know, like as an art major, whatever I'm working on is stuff that I'm thinking about, whether it's intentional or not, you know, it's hard to say. But like a week when, you know, there's political news that's just driving me crazy and I'm obsessive, I'm going to turn out political work. And or a week where my mind is on my relationships, I'm going to turn out something that's more emotive, you know. And I think that's just kind of how our brains operate in the creative fields. But I definitely think that when they sit down and they're working, I think they write down ideas and then they research and they think about it. And I think some of the references they pull, like with Dark Lotus, he talks about, in the song Alibaba, he says, shaken the wilderness of Kadesh. Oh, that's not something he pulled out of his ass, you know, like
Right.
That's something that he had a book with him and he was looking through, you know, and whether they're like super deep knowledgeable about it versus like just kind of casually curious, you know, I think that's a different thing. But I definitely think there's intentionality there. And I think we know that because the mysticism is so, consistent, you know. It's not like one day they're like, oh yeah, these Joker cards are like spirits and they're magical. And then the next the next album they're like, oh no, just kidding, and this is, this is about a scientific concept, or, like it's so specific to this mythology, this ancient sounding mythologies, warped through like this kind of horror movie aesthetic.
I really like the idea of ICP sort of representing the demographic, perhaps, of people who didn't really work out in institutional classroom, whatever. Because I have a lot of people that I know personally who had that same story, like you mentioned, that just it really didn't do well in that environment. And all of those people that I know, once they kind of deconstructed the idea of learning that's programmed into us as kids, that just doesn't work for everyone, they become open to all of these other things and really show that it's not that they're dumb or weird. It's just that it's not the right system for them or whatever. These people are smart. And so if ICP, like, people think that they're dumb, but we've talked for hundreds of hours, about them and their thoughts. So I think you're right. I think there's something there.
I think the education system in America in general is, like, it resists curiosity. Like, we don't teach our youth to be curious. We teach them to memorize shit that has nothing to do with their daily lives, like I'm gonna, like, reveal a little bit of myself on this podcast, but I am the equivalent of a Sunday school teacher in my religion. We don't call it Sunday school, but that's basically what it is. And so I teach, like, high school kids about my religion and my faith and all this. And I'll talk to them about their daily lives, and they'll be like, this one kid was reading Slaughterhouse-Five, which I think is a fantastic book, and I think Kurt Vonnegut's hilarious. So I said to her, I'm like, that book is fucking funny. And she goes, what part of that book is funny? I'm like, all of it. What are you talking about? But she was so determined because she had to read it in a classroom, like, it sterilized it. And she didn't realize it was funny because they're just like, oh yeah, this is a book you have to read. And they teach it in this very dry way. And like, she had no connection. She's like, there's aliens and then it's World War II and it doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, oh, that shit's so funny though. I was like, they make him marry a fucking porn star, and oh god, I just love it. So I think
need to read that book.
You've never read that?
Read it in high school. Don't remember anything about it.
It's the first book in American history that had the phrase "motherfucker" in it, and people and they're like, that's so obscene, like promoting incest. And he goes, you know what's obscene? Watching your friends get blown up.
Right.
The fucking war was obscene. Like, sometimes things are so obscene you have to say the most offensive thing you can think of, and we thought of motherfucker because I was like, oh, this shit's genius. But yeah, so I think the education system, like, we need a total overhaul of it. We need to promote curiosity and find ways to connect with people on sort of their own terms and what they're interested in. Because I think so many people get lost in the system, and they just think like these high stakes testing, and it just grinds on people and it's exhausting. But once you get to college, like I took, like I said, I dropped out of high school. I was a senior, and it took me 10 years to before I went back to school, right? Over 10 years, because I was in my 30s. And when I went back to school, I fucking loved it because I could take classes that were actually interesting and engaging. And then I became an art major, and that I had never thought of myself as like an artist, right? Like that wasn't something that would have occurred to me, even though I did teach myself how to use Photoshop, because back in the day, when I was in my 20s, I was really involved in like the horrorcore scene as sort of a fan and somebody who was excited about it. And so I would find like lesser known acts, and I would make flyers for them, or like help them make their websites, or whatever I could do, because I wanted to be part of this thing that I thought was exciting and interesting. And as I moved from Hell's Pit into like the Tempest, I fucking hated that Tempest era. So I started finding these darker, more underground acts, and I was like just flourishing in that community. And so I learned all these skills, but I never thought of myself as like an artist. It was just somebody needed a flyer or like it was a utility, not creative. And then I went back to school, and the only class I could get into, or one of the only classes I could get into, was an art class. And she's like, the teacher would talk to me about like, why did you use these colors? I'm like, oh, I was thinking about something that I heard from this rapper one time about how you have to have the rapper being Violent J. He talked about how they would use different colors for their flyers because they kept, And so I would say that, and she'd be like, wow, that's fascinating. Like, I wouldn't have thought about that. And, it's her job to understand color, And so
wow.
you should pursue like the arts. And so I took it. She talked me into applying for this honors art class that I didn't think I was going to get into. And I got really depressed right before the deadline to submit my portfolio. I had to make a portfolio because I didn't have any other work. And right before the portfolio was due, I was super depressed, and I threw it all away. I was like, I'm not even going to try because I'm not going to get in. Because the teacher even told me, she's like, most people, they have to apply like 3 or 4 times before they get into this program, but it's good practice, and it'll get me making work on my own because I'll be making new portfolios. And so I got depressed. I threw it all away, and then about an hour before the deadline was over, I was at school and I was listening on my headphones to just like a random playlist, and Hell's Pit, or not Hell's Pit, I'm sorry. The Great Milenko, the song, Pass Me By came on, and, the hook was just repeating, they put like 100 hooks on those songs.
Right.
It repeats and repeats. But he's like, even though I almost never try, I'm not going to let this pass me by. And I was just thinking about that while it was playing. I was like, yeah, why don't I try? Like, why am I letting this opportunity go past? And so I was like, fuck it. And I took the thing out of the trash, and I went and I dropped it off. And I was like, I'm probably not going to get it. I'm not going to let it, like, the opportunity slip through my hands just because I don't want to try. And then I got in and it completely changed my, my second art class ever was this honors art class where I got to make work that would go in the campus museum for a month, and I had to do like all these speeches about it and interviews, and it was crazy. And people would ask me like, if you could work with any like artist, who would you work with? And I'm like, I don't really know the arts, like I hadn't at the time. I was completely ignorant. I didn't grow up in a family where art was important, so I didn't have like a favorite painter, or I didn't even know any artists who worked in the medium that I worked in that were like fine art, because I worked in video, and I was like, that doesn't, like, you hear about movies, but you don't hear about fine art video. So I would just be like, I don't have an answer to that other than to say like this weird rap group that I like. So I looked like a fucking idiot, like up there, like I'd be like this woman next to me would be like, oh, I'd work with Frida Kahlo, and somebody else would be like, oh, if I could, I'd work with Rembrandt, and somebody else would be like, oh, so and so, and I'd be like, yeah, I don't know, dude.
Wicked Clowns. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's kind of like whatever, and it's this group that I started off by being like dissing, But then I just started like, just kind of thinking about like who I wanted to be as an artist and where I wanted to go and all this shit. And I completely changed my academic experience because before that I didn't have a drive towards anything. It was just kind of floundering, And so I think if I had known about art, and if I had known about that kind of creative passion and how there's really no rules about art and it can be anything, I think I would have been a lot more excited about it from a younger age, and I would have gotten started. Because I did, like, back in the day when I was in high school, I took a video production class, sort of like you see on old movies and TV shows. They'll have like the AV club. We didn't call it that. It was just a class that you could take. But we could check out cameras. And so, most of the time we would check out the cameras. We would go do some backyard wrestling, film it, and then I'd goof off with the cameras for a week. And, and then we'd turn in like whatever, like just, we'd edit on these like VHS cassettes, cause this was pre-digital. It was in the 90s. And, I just had all these weird VHSs that were just like random collages of shit that I filmed. And I never thought of that as art. It was just me killing time. I was bored. I didn't have cable. I wasn't that into video games, so it took me like 12 years or whatever before I realized like, oh, I can do shit with this. I can be creative about it. and it all ties into the whole, like, my experience as, like, an ICP fan, and so it's interesting the way that the world kind of weaves in and out.
You know what, man? This is blowing my mind right now because Bill and I became friends. We met at film school, and we both got film degrees. And Bill went on to work in the film industry, and I didn't like LA, and I went decided to do other things. But one thing that I did do is when I was a senior in college, I spent a ton of money that I did not have to buy a really nice video camera because I thought I'm going to be working in this industry. I'm going to be shooting stuff all the time. And it's a good investment for me to buy this. It was like the top of the line, prosumer grade video camera. And that video camera went in a box and stayed in a box for almost 20 years, or whatever. Yeah. That it's been. I've never recorded anything with that camera after purchasing it. Not a single thing. And I, until recently, recorded the first thing, used it for the first time ever to shoot. I don't know if you saw this, Rob, but I shot like a little, video intro for the puppet that I made, of this robot.
Because that shit was wild. So it was a puppet that you made, okay? Because it didn't
Yeah.
look stop, but it didn't look it like I couldn't figure out what you did. So it was a puppet. That's interesting. Because you had a whole set built. I mean, I'm sure it was probably scale. But it looked like a whole set with like this physical being. So it didn't look animated. I was blown away. I thought it was really cool.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I've never done anything like that before. I mean, I've worked on a lot of films and videos and stuff like that. I've worked on set as a production assistant or whatever. But that's the first thing that I made that puppet. I built the set. I did all the lighting. I set up all the shots. I did the puppetry myself. Like as I'm doing the shots, I'm behind the camera, starting to record, hit the smoke machine, clicking the lights, run around the camera and stick my hand in the puppet.
It's so, isn't it?
What's that?
That's so fun, isn't it? Like just
Oh
making.
my God, it was a blast. Yeah, and what an interesting coincidence, that the thing that actually drew me out from 20 years to pull this thing and dust it off and record something was inspired by ICP. So yeah, here we are.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because our generation, I'm assuming you're about the same age as me, like the early millennials, late 30s, we grew up with video equipment and with this interest in video technology that I think earlier generations, like maybe they explored it a little bit, but I think there's just something about that age range where people just started having cameras and we would start using them, and now everybody's got a fucking camera, but
Right.
they just take selfies, like there's no creativity. Like I get mad when I'm scrolling on Instagram and all the pictures look the same. I'm like, you guys have so much like image knowledge in your brains and you're gonna reduce it to like the same shit your friends did, like it just drives me nuts. But I don't know, man. I mean, back when I was in high school and I was doing that video stuff, the popular show that had just come out was Jackass, and so people just doing like Jackass stunts, and so all my friends, anytime anybody had a camera, like we all took that class and we would do backyard wrestling, with those cameras, and then we'd go and just goof off, like it didn't matter, like just anything we could think of, because like it was cool to be able to record it and then watch you and your friends on TV, and
Sure.
I just thought it was just so exciting of a time. And I was never interested in film. Like I took one film class and, at UC Irvine which was the second school that I went to because I started at a community college and then transferred. And halfway through that class, I'm like, I don't like this. Like, I don't give. Like the teacher would be like lecturing about lighting, and I'm like, I don't give a fuck about the light. Like, who gives a shit? Like, it was so technical, And then he's like, collaborate with your fellow classmates and get somebody to be your DP and get somebody else to be the actor and get somebody else to write it. And I'm like, why? Like, I'm just working shit together. Like, I just wanted to go, I wanted to be the fucking oddball shit. And, it's kind of
That's
funny.
awesome, man.
I think the work that I did at the community college, was more interesting than the stuff that I did in my film class at UC Irvine, because I felt like I went backwards because I had freedom, and so like that honors class that I took where my work went in the video, or in the museum, I had a video of, a friend of mine, and I just filmed her kind of like I filmed her face, and she was kind of like turning around, and she was kind of making like this expression, and then kind of just continuing her motion. And then I took that loop and I shot it into a room filled with smoke from a smoke machine. And then I, took the second thing that I filmed, and then I projected that into the smoke, and then I filmed again, and then I just kept doing it until it created this like really ghostly image where the smoke's moving at all these different speeds, and it's just this very trippy thing. It's my favorite thing that I've made. And it was like my first experiment, because I was experimenting. I was like, I don't know what the fuck this is gonna look like, but it's fun, exciting. And I think that's like, that's my favorite shit. I could talk about art shit all day. But I love like figuring shit out. And I think, like, to take it back to ICP and that question earlier about, like, is it intentional? You know, I think that's kind of how they were too, right? Like, they would take the stuff that was sort of on their minds, and they had fun with it. You know, there's a video on YouTube of them hanging out in, what's called the Funhouse Studio, but it's Mikey Clark's bedroom.
Right.
And, they're making prank phone calls, and they're hitting the sampler, and they're recording the samples. And it reminds me of, so there's this painter that I do like now that I didn't know about back in the day, but, his name is Jean-Michel Basquiat, and there's this really great film about, his life, called Basquiat. And, in it, this painter who's like, are you familiar with his work at all, or do you know that name?
Can't say that I am.
Okay, so you need to look up Jean-Michel Basquiat. I'll send you some shit. And you need to watch this movie. But in this movie, this painter who's like, the art star of the day, like Andy Warhol put him like on the map, and he just became this instant celebrity, in the 80s. And, he had this like experimental band called Grey, and they show in this movie, like a reenactment of how they wrote one of their songs, which was he called up a, suicide hotline, and he said he took too many pills and he was suicidal and he didn't know what was going on in his life, and he recorded the dialogue, and then he sampled it and he put it into this experimental electronic music. And it's just like it reminds me of that moment of ICP in the Funhouse, you know, just playing and having fun with the shit that's offensive but also like funny and weird and just kind of dark and sad, you know. It's just it's so good. But yeah, Basquiat's shit, he gets name dropped a lot by like big name hip hop artists that are from New York, because he was from New York. He was Haitian, and he started out doing graffiti, but not like graffiti that like what you would recognize as graffiti, where it's like these big giant geometric shapes that somehow spell out a word, but you can't really figure out what it says, and it's usually like a person's street name or whatever. That's not what he did. He would do like these plain block letters of like these very poetic phrases, like he would write the sentence, or the partial sentence, the area code of St. Louis. So it wouldn't be like the numbers to the area code of St. Louis. It would be the phrase, the area code of St. Louis. Mm-hmm. And people would be walking down the street and be like, what the fuck does that mean? You know, and so his graffiti even was weird, you know. It was just bizarre. But his paintings are very very dynamic and very like sort of unconventional, and he got called primitive a lot, and he hated that because he's like, what, like a primate because I'm black? Like, he would just throw it back at art critics and call them racist to their faces and stuff. But it had that very like rough kind of aesthetic, and he uses, because he's Haitian, of Haitian descent, he uses a lot of like voodoo imagery and stuff. Which is actually, so, to bring it back to ICP, because I feel like I'm going off on tangents. That other email I sent you about, the ringmaster, with the Baron, Samade, he's another chthonic spirit. And I learned about the Baron, through a Jean-Michel Basquiat painting, called the Irony of the Negro Policeman. And so it's about, black police officers who, so it's about black police officers and how that's like ironic, because the police, especially in New York in the 80s were connected to racial killings, right? Like even today, right? Like we have Black Lives Matter, it's a controversial thing. And so he paints this police officer like the Baron, who is a spirit of the crossroads, and he ushers people from this world to the next. He kind of carries your spirit, to the afterlife, so you remember that, what is it? My early hip hop knowledge isn't that great. I think it's, Bone Thugs and Harmony has that song Crossroads. Is that who it was?
Yes.
Yeah. See, that's when I was still listening to like punk rock and shit. So
That was a huge song, man. Everybody heard that song.
yeah, well, I mean, my brother was all about hip hop, so I definitely heard it. But I'll see you at the Crossroads. That Crossroads is a Haitian voodoo thing. Like it's a real belief of a physical place where you would go to the underworld, and the Baron's job was to take you there, right? And so he would raise you up out of your grave, and if you showed him a good time, he would delay taking you to the afterlife. And if you showed him a good enough time, he would like let you chill. And you just had to keep him drunk and surround him with beautiful women and just dancing and partying, and he didn't give a fuck. Like he would skirt. But obviously that doesn't happen very often. And I thought it was so interesting. Like in the email I sent you, the aesthetic of this Baron that's so tied to this idea of the crossroads and the underworld is almost the inverse of the Carnival Ringmaster, and they're both based on the same set of imagery, but the Carnival Ringmaster amplifies it and makes it more decadent and more sort of ostentatious and like just kind of gaudy, like the lining of the coat would be gold instead of just kind of plain or whatever. And then the Baron, his is more raggedy and more disheveled. And so when you put those together, you really get the look of like sort of the Juggalo version of the Ringmaster, where it's creepy and it's ugly and it's tattered, but it's still flamboyant and over the top, And so I thought that was just such a fascinating exploration of the aesthetics of both of these, this mythological figure and the Ringmaster,
Fucking A, Rob. That's the good shit, man. You're knocking it out of the park right now. Love
Glad
it.
to hear it.
Fucking
I think
love it.
like, oh my God, I'm such a nerd.
No way, man. I was so impressed reading that email. I'm glad that you mentioned it. Yeah. That was totally incredible. And I want to appreciate you also for kind of opening up and sharing some of your personal stuff. I kind of feel like that's one of the great things, getting my experience with other juggalos and meeting them has always been this sort of fearlessness to kind of open up and share about yourself. And and so that's kind of what I'm getting from you. I just want to appreciate, that's something that's really cool about this culture, brings people together and share cool things, and just, because of listeners like you, it's really added to the richness of this podcast and made it so much more fun for me and the guys. That you guys can come in and share your experiences and share your thoughts with strangers, and come up with these like cool conversations, these cool ideas that we can share. It's really, really great. So I appreciate it. And actually, along with that, if you're willing to share a little bit more, there's a question I have. When you first initially contacted us, we were talking about some issues of sexuality and how sexual identity is incorporated in the music. We were kind of criticizing that. And I noticed in your email that you had a Facebook account that was Jugga LGBT, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so you get the first time I emailed you responded to me. You're like, "What can I give a shout out to?" And so I do that page, and I think that's kind of what spurred that initial conversation. But yeah, so Jugga LGBT is a page that my homegirl Tina, she's a trans woman and a juggalo. She set it up with another friend of ours named Hayne, who is a gender fluid juggalo, and I think Tina's bisexual, and I think Hayne identifies as pansexual. And then for a while, the page was kind of inactive, and they're like, "We need some new blood." So they reached out to me, or I reached out to them. I don't remember, but we became friends. I started helping out on the site, and now we got a homie named Tox, who's a trans dude, And I'm like the token cis het guy. You know, like I'm not queer, but I'm down with the queer community. You know, I'm very involved in like LGBT activism and things like that. And so it just kind of meshed together. And because of that website, like or that Facebook page, I've met like hundreds of juggalos that are LGBT in some or questioning in some capacity or another. And the conversations I've had have been so amazing, which is interesting because like I think ICP gets labeled as like super homophobic because of their language. And I think like their language is very homophobic, but their message also reaches out to the freaks and the weirdos and the people that don't fit into society. And who doesn't fit into society more than the people who like the identity queer literally means weird, right? Like that's where the word comes from. And so it's interesting to me that those people gravitate so hard to it, even though there is so much homophobia. And, you know, and there's no divorcing, like Violent J and Shaggy are homophobic. Like there's no question about it. Like if you watch their interview, there's a interview they did with Howard Stern, and these guys like prank ICP and they walk into the studio naked, and like Violent J gets really upset. Like, I can't believe I just saw this guy's dick. Like, and he gets, like, he threatens them with violence. And George Takei is sitting there, also in the studio, and they're saying stuff that's very violent to these men just because they happen to be naked in front of them. So, I mean, there's no question that there's something about sexuality that is uncomfortable for them. Right. And I think, like, I think that's really interesting. And maybe it has to do with, Violent J doesn't talk about it very much, and like it's kind of awkward to talk about it, but he talks about in his book, like some childhood sexual abuse. And so I don't know if that's what kind of drives his feelings of discomfort and he just hasn't dealt with that, or if it's something else, something more. I know he's trying to be better about it. His girlfriend right now, Becky, who was Blase Rose, who was briefly on their record label, she's bisexual, and I think she introduces a lot of that, like perspective into his life now, and I think that's part of why he's trying to grow. But also I want to give a shout out to Ouija Mac, who, when Ouija was first working with Psychopathic, Violent J sat him down and was like, "Are you gay? Like, is this something we're gonna have to address?" And Ouija was like, "Nah, I'm not. I just think gay people are fucking cool. Like, gay people fucking kick ass, you know?" And so Violent J was like, "Okay, how do I deal with this?" You know? And so I think that also played a huge part. And I love Ouija Mac for that, you know? And I think, sure. And I think Twisted, back when they were still on Psychopathic, they were doing an interview, with somebody. I don't remember who the interview was with, but, somebody asked them about their use of the word faggot, and I think it was Monoxide who said that he stopped using it because he had this realization when he had kids that, like, if they grew up to be gay, like, how would that affect them, you know? And so I know that they were out of some of their homophobic language that they sort of grew up with, but then they turned around and signed Gmo Ski, who still uses homophobic disses like left and right. So, you know, there's definitely still work for both camps to do. But I think it's interesting that that's a question that, as society is dealing with this idea of identity and gender and sexuality, so is the Juggalo culture, you know, and I think it's fascinating. And I think, anybody who's a friend of the queer community or who's interested in LGBTQ rights, or is part of that community, they should check out Jugga LGBT. We're kind of not that active anymore again, just because there's 4 of us, and like most juggalos and like most LGBTQ people, we're all to varying degrees mentally ill in some capacity, you know, and I think that just kind of like it just kind of weighs on us sometimes, and we're not as active and engaged as we should be. But we're always trying to find stuff to do. I was trying to organize, and it didn't pan out, but I was trying to organize some stuff for Juggalo Weekend to try and have like a Jugga LGBT like meetup, since it's out here in LA. But it didn't pan out. But yeah, I think that shit that shit, I love it. You know, like, I want to give a shout out to a homie, actually a couple homies right now. One of them's named Veronica. She's probably listening to this because I've actually gotten her addicted to your podcast.
Nice. What's up, Veronica? Thanks for the listen.
She's dope. And I met her, she was in the military or she still is in the military, but she was stationed out here in LA for a little while, and she reached out to the Jughead LGBT page. She's like, hey, I heard one of you is from LA, like, let's kick it. And so I was like, yeah, let's do it, you know. And at the same time, I was building a friendship with this other dude named Ryan, and he was telling me, so we were on this message board, this Juggalo message board, and he was like, oh, I'll pick you up for the, you know, some show, whatever tour was coming through that time. And so we were going to hang out, and I was like, oh, cool, I'm going to meet up with this girl, Veronica. And he's like, oh, yeah, the homie from this message board, who went by the name V-Ron, was going to join us too. And I was like, that's cool. And I didn't put together that V-Ron and Veronica were the same person, even though the name's the fucking same, right?
Right.
I put together, but I didn't. And so we all ended up hanging out, and that was my Juggalo group for the longest time, was that central group, and other people who splintered off from that. But and that's because of Jughead LGBT. After I stopped doing backyard wrestling, and then by the time I kind of like I said, like just after Hell's Pit, I kind of started getting more into like the darker horrorcore stuff and not so much the ICP shit. I didn't have really Juggalo friends in the area, and so that was an exciting time for me, which came out of that Jughead LGBT page, just building those local Juggalo friendships instead of just everything being online and shit, you know. So I love that shit. The page, like, it's awesome to me. Homies from that shit helped me get to my first gathering. You know, like, people just give a fuck, you know, and it's just exciting. And yeah, I'm rambling.
Yeah,
I'm
man.
sorry.
No, that's great, man. That's exactly what we're all about. That Bill, Steve, and I are super, super proud to support that. Yeah. So thank you, man. You actually mentioned Juggalo Weekend. Since the podcast has been on a hiatus, I have not been able to. I actually intentionally stopped consuming ICP stuff because it was making me too bummed out. Like, if I followed along with things, I would want to talk about it, and I didn't have an outlet for it. So I just kind of like closed off that side. And you shot us an email of like, hey, this is in LA. So I forwarded it along to Bill, and so we're gonna go. And I'm really excited to be seeing ICP again. In just in a couple weeks. And I was actually looking up the lineup, and Bill and I are going to go to the Saturday show. And it looks like they're going to be playing with Cottonmouth Kings, which I'm super excited to see, and Power Flow, which I had never heard of. Are you familiar with Power Flow, Rob?
I looked them up, and I think it's a super group of a bunch of people that I am not familiar with.
Oh my God, are you kidding me? Okay, so yeah, you're right. It's a power group. It's Sendog, who's the other guy from Cypress Hill, Not Be Real. And it's a project that he dreamed up with a couple of the guys from Biohazard. And Biohazard is famous to me for being on the Judgment Night soundtrack, where they had it was a whole album soundtrack that was like bands mixed together, rock bands or metal bands mixed with hip hop rap artists. And Biohazard did a song with Onyx on that CD.
I've heard that album, and I've never listened to it. I've never been able to find it. Like,
really?
Whenever I think about it, I go and I look to find it. I should check if Spotify has it. I've never listened to it.
It's got to be out there somewhere. Yeah, and actually, I don't have that album anymore either. So that would be a bummer if I wasn't able to listen to it ever again. But and then some other guys in the band. If for LA people, I guess one of the guys from Downset is in that, which was an LA like kind of.
I know.
Rap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a cousin who was all into them when we were in high school, and he would just play the fucking Do We Speak a Dead Language was their album.
Yep, that's the album I had.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. I didn't realize that. I looked at the names, I'm like, I don't know these people. It was a super group of people that I wasn't familiar with. And I fucking hate Cottonmouth Kings. So I'm like, oh, I love ICP, but how much do I love them? And their new tour, they just announced, I don't know if you saw about it, but it's Psychopathics from Outer Space Part 2. So it's a revamp of the Psychopathics from Outer Space tour that they did, or Wicked Clowns from Outer Space, I think is actually what the tour was called. Back in the day, like their biggest, baddest fucking live show that they ever did. So they're going on that again, and they're not bringing it to LA, and I'm like, oh my god. But I mean, I guess it makes sense because we get Juggalo weekend, but I just like, I would rather go to that tour, I think. Cause I'm
Well,
just
Rob, they're not going to LA, but they are coming to San Diego. And the first Wicked Clowns from Outer Space tour is the first concert that I saw ICP. And I saw them twice in like 4 days. I saw them in San Diego, and then I drove up and saw them in Oakland 2 days later. Um,
Christ, that sounds like an adventure.
on that same tour. Dude, you don't even know, my fucking car died in Los Banos, like in Central California desert at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. My Honda Civic, I stopped for gas and then it just wouldn't start. So I called, this was like before cell phones, and even like most people didn't even have pagers yet. And so I called my friend, and he had to drive like 3 hours to come and pick me up. And we just left my car there and went and saw ICP. I was like, I'll deal with it later. And then, long story longer, had to tow my truck to Fresno, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. Had to fly home to San Diego, left my car in Fresno for like 2 weeks until they finally fixed it for me to fly back up and get it. It was a huge hassle, cost me thousands of dollars, to fix that car. And it was just so that I could see ICP with my best friend, up in Oakland.
You're not wanting to drive to San Diego is what you're doing.
But yeah, that was also the show in Oakland, was the one where I met this guy Dave, who was one of the regulars that I used to chat with in the ICP chat room, back in like the late 90s, when that shit was really active. So yeah, lots of old memories for me. They're playing, it's in May, so hopefully I can go. It's like on a Wednesday, which is weird. Because I'm super old, I can't stay up late, but I just feel like I have to go, just because it's them coming around again from the first tour when I ever saw them. It's like notori.
Yeah, I actually didn't catch that tour. I didn't start getting to go to shows until a little bit later. But I was super bummed out. But I grew up fucking dirt broke and shit, and right now I'm fucking dirt broke. So I catch that show or not. And I think I'm only going to the Friday Juggalo weekend right now, unless something comes through with some money. But
Right on.
so yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna catch that brick by brick performance, the Wicked Clowns, but I hope I do, because I should. I imagine it's fucking bonkers, and they haven't said anything about a Psychopathics from Outer Space album to go with that tour. But I'm hoping that they got something in the works, because like, how can you have that tour without that fucking album, you know?
Right. That would be so fresh. And I know they're gonna have a cool shirt too, so it'd be worth it to me to go just get the shirt.
I saw ICP in San Diego. It's actually the only time I've ever seen them in San Diego. It was, I think, the Riddlebox tour, and when they were touring all the old albums and shit.
Mhm.
And it was so fucking dope. We were we were in the like mosh pit area, and Violent J has like a case of Fagos, right? Like 6 or 8 2-liters of Fago, and he chucks the whole box right at me. And like, I don't know if he like saw me. And that's a guy who's big enough to catch a box of fucking Fagos and not fall over with the crowd, and it happened to hit me in the chest. But it was dead right in my chest, and I grabbed it, and everybody's like ripping the sodas out of my hand. I almost didn't even get a 2-liter out of it, and it made me mad, and I kind of just dropped the box. But at the end of the show, I saw the box, and I kind of picked it up, and there was a fucking chicken hunting shirt that looks like the Nintendo design inside the box. And so I fucking up. Yeah, he fucking threw it right at me too. I was so hyped, but then I looked at it and it was like a size too small for me, so I gave it to my homies. So
Dude, that's still a fucking rad story though. That's awesome.
Fucking dope. So San Diego is always gonna hold a piece of my heart,
Nice.
because I was fucking lit. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I get it, man. Like, I was definitely flying when I saw them the first time. I got up on I actually got a dope spot. I was right up in the front because I was one of the first guys there, And then we got pushed around the barricade that was right up against the stage. There's this huge steel barricade, and the crowd just pushed us over there, and security just let us stand there. There was me and one other girl that had got pushed over to the side. So we were literally standing at the foot of the stage with no one else around us and a steel barricade protecting us from the crowd that was smashed up against it. And then as soon as they said, "All right, everybody get on stage," I was just right there. So I was immediately up on stage. What?
I'm kind of fat and short, so I never really like made it up on the stages back in the day. The first show that I ever went to was, I think it was the Bizarre Bazaar tour or something around that era, with Mars. And, that fucking asshole Mars climbed up on the speakers and he jumped off into the crowd, and like everybody moved away from where he was jumping. So I took the entirety of his body, like landing on my face.
Oh, Jesus.
I can butt me. And oh my God, it fucking hurt so bad. And his fucking face paint was all smeared across my baseball cap because I had a plain white baseball cap that I was wearing, and it just had his face like imprinted on it for like a month. Like it was not grease paint, you know, and fucking water just rolled right off of it, so you couldn't really wash it. Like, but yeah, that was my first show, was the one with the Mars when he started wearing the face paint. So it was after, it wasn't the band Mars, it was him as a like rapper. Let's take me back. That's back when the shit was fun. And that's actually something I wanted to say to you. When you were talking about, like how the juggalos that have been responding to you have helped make the podcast better. I want to give you props but there's some people in the juggalo community who just like to stir drama and talk shit. And it's like, they forget that this shit's supposed to be fun. You know, people forget that this shit's supposed to be like something that you come to your homies with and you're like, you gotta check out this weird shit. You gotta check out this fucking, it's not like anything else, you know, whether it's the wrestling, the fucking JCW tapes weren't like any other wrestling at that time in American pop culture, you know, the fucking comic books were so fucking weird and different. The fucking, all of it, the toys and the action figures, it was all about just being fucking fun and new and interesting. And I think the Juggalo world as a collective kind of forgets that sometimes, and you guys have fun with it, you know, and I like, that's kind of what I liked about your show at first. Why I went back and I started from the beginning when I heard you guys talking about, like the first one I listened to was the Juggle Brothers one, I think. And then I was like, oh man, these guys are like actually interested in this shit, and they're trying to understand it as people who kind of fell away and then came back to it. So I was like, I have to listen to the whole thing. I have to know what they're talking about, fun that they're having. And then it was entertaining, you know. I wish like that's how the whole community was, and that's why I like your guys' podcast. There's none of this like judgment behind it, you know. It's just like people's tastes are people's tastes, but let's understand the text, you know. Let's understand the writing and the aesthetics, and so that's why I enjoy it. Like there's this deeper element to it beyond just like, oh yeah, Malenko's a good album, you know. Like yeah, Malenko's a good album. Like so I fucking love what you guys do, and that's kind of why I tell all my friends like, hey, listen to this.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so dope. Yeah, man. I think that's basically exactly what we're trying to go for, you know?
I don't know. I mean, when I was telling my homie Veronica about you guys, I described you as relapsing juggalos. I was like, they're juggalos that went clean for a while, but they fell off the wagon.
Right. We're creeping back in.
It brings together like the coolest people. I think most juggalos are just fucking fascinating. You know, I mentioned to you in the emails that we were talking that I want to do a podcast where I just talk with juggalos about like their lives, because I think juggalos, like the juggalos I know through the internet and through sort of going to the gathering and stuff, are fucking amazing people. Like I wish there was like this channel to like just archive all these people that I meet, and so I want to start doing. That's going to be the podcast when I actually get around to getting it started. Because I think juggalos are fucking amazing, you know, like there's this richness to our stories that I think, like I like to tell people when they would ask me like, why do you like ICP? Like, why are juggalos like ICP fans? I'll be like, we're not ICP fans. We're fans of other juggalos, and ICP just happen to be like the most famous juggalos, you know, like they're the same kind of people in it, and they're doing their thing, and they wave the flag, and we found them because of that. But it's not about like, we don't get together and just be like, you know, without ICP, I would die, or, you know, like anything like that. It's just like,
Right.
it's fucking amazing, you know, like, fucking gatherings, like, I don't, you guys went to some of the early gatherings, right? Like, I only went to a couple of the later ones. I couldn't make it to the early ones, but like, we would sit around and just talk about our lives. It was like crazy, you know, like we'd have people from all over the country just sitting around talking about their hometowns and their family and their friends and shit. And then it'd be like, oh, you know, Onyx is playing. Let's go check them out, you know, and the music seemed secondary. I don't know. I think it's cool. I love Juggalos.
You know, I went to the first gathering, and I didn't really find the first gathering to be like a real social atmosphere.
Right.
But we did, and so we ended up getting a hotel, paying for a hotel room. But one thing that was cool was in the hotel, everybody that was there was a juggalo. All the hotel room doors were open. Everybody was playing ICP music in their room, and the whole floor was just a big conglomeration of people that were going in and out of each other's rooms and meeting each other. And you could hear even when we went to bed, like people were up all night, you know, playing music and talking out in the halls. And so that was pretty cool.
I mean, that's like the same atmosphere as the gathering, right? Like there was things to do, and so you went and you did them, and then you went back to your hotel, and that's where the like hanging out took place. But now you're camping like 10 feet from the main stage, you know? So it's like there's like this element of like, well, this is my home for the weekend, you know? And people would just hang out. My first time, I took the Greyhound, but I had a bag with a tent. I didn't know how to set up my tent, so some juggalos helped me set it up, you know, and they were like laughing at me because I didn't know what I was doing. You know, and I didn't know anybody there. I was just by myself, and like people would be like, "Oh, come over, you know, we got extra food, come over," you know, and like it was so like communal.
Well, Rob, this conversation, this call has been a real treat, man. I really want to say thank you again, that you can make it onto the show. I wanted to give you an opportunity if there's anything else that you want to plug, anything for the listeners for them to check out.
Yeah, check out Jugga LGBT on Facebook, and I think Twitter. There might be an Instagram page, but I don't think we use it. But primarily Facebook and Twitter. And then you can follow me on Instagram. My username is _ the word no, KNOW _ tomorrow _ and I also have, if you want to check out some of my art, if you just search Robert Tidwell art on Instagram, it should pop up. And and you can search my name, Robert Tidwell, and Carnival of Carnage, and that essay that I mentioned about Carnival of Carnage is floating around on some website. I don't remember the website, but you can find it there. There's some short stories I tried to write that weren't very good on that same site, but
yeah, I'm writing that down because I definitely want to check that out. Well, thank you, man. And you can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram now that we are somewhat posting episodes. I don't know. Those things will get updated as well. So you can check us out, Dim Carnival on Twitter and Instagram. You can also email us if you have any thoughts about anything that we talked about, anything that you want to share. We love hearing from listeners. It's dimcarnival@gmail.com. I have no idea what's next. It could be music videos with Steve. It could be talking about Hell's Pit with Bill. It could be the episode on Voodoo from Val. Who knows and when those are going to come out, but those are the things that we're working on. And our posting schedule is going to be irregular from here on out. But until then, I'm Ryan.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Dim Carnival.
Woo-woo.